Hello and welcome back to Podfinder. My name is Philip, and I'm here to talk about Pathfinder 1st Edition. Today's video is the third in the Merry Little Sinmas, my sequel series to last year's 12 Days of Sinmas, and if you don't know what that means, I suggest checking out the playlists in the description. Basically, over a 7-week period, I'm covering the story of the Runelords of Thassilon in the Age of Lost Omens, preparing players and GMs for Revenge of the Runelords. Today's video is another campaign summary. Well, sort of. Unlike last week, I'm covering the events of 4 products: Curse of the Crimson Throne, Second Darkness, the Year of the Risen Rune PFS scenarios, and the Lord of Runes novel. My goal here is to get you and your game group caught up on the lore of Thassilon and Varisia so you can jump right into the new Revenge of the Runelords mythic adventure path. I said this in the introduction to this series, but these videos aren't intended to examine every possible nook and cranny of these products, merely to cover the important events, major players, and prominent locations explored within. If your group has the time and interest, I definitely suggest playing through the whole Runelords series, and at least reading through these other products. But I recognize that isn't even remotely feasible for most groups. For those of you with better things to do with your time, or who simply need a little lore refresh, I put together this video series as a summary. Before that though, if you enjoy this video and want to hear more Pathfinder lore, consider subscribing, or commenting below. Or if you want to support the channel directly, check out my Patreon. Just $2 a month gets you access to all my scripts, as well as the audio files for all my videos, all of which drop at least a week early. Let me begin with something which should be obvious. Spoiler alert. This video actively spoils major plot points in the Curse of the Crimson Throne and Second Darkness adventure paths, as well as the Rise of the Runelords adventure path I discussed last week. This video will also spoil all of the Pathfinder Society scenarios associated with the Year of the Risen Rune event, which took place in 2012 and 2013. Finally, this video will spoil the entirety of the Lord of Runes novel by Dave Gross. I will discuss major plot points in each of those products to ensure that the topic is explored fully. Do not watch this video if you intend to play or read those products and need to remain spoiler-free. Also, you'll notice that this video covers events from 4 main storylines which are spread apart in time. I'm grouping these 4 stories together in this series because no one of them is long enough to justify its own video. Technically, the last of these, Lord of Runes, occurs after the events of Shattered Star, which I will discuss next week. I just wanted to clarify that here before we begin. Additionally, this video, and the others in this series, assumes you've seen my 12 Days of Sinmas series. I'll be assuming a basic knowledge of the material covered in those videos, mainly to avoid having to retread ground I've covered before. Alright, with that out of the way, let's dig in. Curse of the Crimson Throne and Second Darkness. The next 2 adventure paths in the Paizo canon, after Rise of the Runelords, were Curse of the Crimson Throne and Second Darkness. While both of these have some connection to the Runelords, due to being set in Varisia, Thassilon plays a much smaller role in the overall plots. In Curse of the Crimson Throne, Queen Iliosa of Korvosa becomes corrupted by an artifact called the Crown of Fangs, which imbues her with the malice and power of a long-dead dragon warlord from Belkzen. In addition to several other goals, Iliosa seeks immortality, and the records she finds in the treasure room of her castle gives her a hint at how to achieve it. The city-state of Korvosa was built on the ruins of Zin Eurythnia, the capital city of Eurythnia, domain of Sortian, the Runelord of Lust. The most notable Thassilonian ruin at this location was, and still is, an immense black pyramid called the Grand Mastaba by the locals. At the time of Korvosa's founding, the royal family constructed Castle Korvosa atop the Grand Mastaba, symbolizing the domination of the Chelish colonizers over their local populations of Varisians and Shoanti. Of course, this Grand Mastaba was in actuality the fortress and tomb of Runelord Sorshin, where she laid in stasis, waiting for her Runewell of Lust to wake her. Sorshin was first partially awakened in 4702, when Makmurian accidentally activated Karzug's Runewell of Greed. Rather than immediately getting to work on her own emergence and return to power, however, Sorshin chose to remain in her tomb and observe the development of society in the Age of Lost Omens. Sorshin would take no action throughout Curse of the Crimson Throne, but was slowly waking up and coming to realize what was going on in the wider world. But just because Sorshin was not active doesn't mean her artifacts and research were not put to use. Having been corrupted by the Crown of Fangs, Iliosa discovers the repository of artifacts and ancient tomes in her castle's treasure chambers. These point toward Sorshin's infamous Everdawn Pool, which Iliosa could use to channel the life force of others into her own body, so she might become immortal. Iliosa travels into the Mushvens, the swamps which represent the remaining territory of Old Eurythnia. Deep in the swamps, she locates an ancient structure dubbed the Sunken Queen, a pyramid marked with Sorshin's iconography. Entering the pyramid, Iliosa discovers the Everdawn Pool and begins the process of drawing its power into herself. She's finally stopped in these efforts by the Korvosan heroes, the protagonists of the Curse of the Crimson Throne adventure path. These characters manage to thwart Iliosa's machinations, but have no means of destroying the Everdawn Pool itself, and thus leave it in the Mushvens. Only years later, in 4716, does Sorshin take action. Quietly, she uses her magic to transport the Everdawn Pool into her chambers beneath the Grand Mastaba. And beyond that, she continues to merely bide her time. The events of Second Darkness kicked off only a few months later in the city of Riddleport. Before I begin this section, I need to clarify that many of the events in Second Darkness, or at least many of the specifics, are no longer canon. Second Darkness is driven by the Drow, the Dark Elves, who have been wiped from the canon since the events of the real-world OGL crisis. I'll be covering the relevant events in this AP as they were written, but bear in mind that the official version of these events has yet to be clarified. Second Darkness is driven by the Drow House Azrene, who seek to develop a weapon capable of replicating the ancient effects of the Earthfall calamity. To accomplish this, the House leader, Alevra Azrene, sends her agents to Riddleport to examine the Ciphergate, and they are the first to work out the artifact's true purpose: to peer through time. After working this secret out and collecting a sample of the Ciphergate stone, the Azrene agents then travel to the Plane of Shadow and manipulate the strange properties of that realm to peer through time and observe the devastation and magical radiation in the days immediately following Earthfall. This experience gives them the information necessary to further develop their ritual, granting them the ability to call meteors down from the sky. The remainder of the AP has relatively little to do with Thassilon, or the broader plot of the Runelords. The heroes ultimately thwart the efforts of House Azrene, whose goal is to wipe out the elves of Keonan. What I want to highlight here is one of the local Riddleport crime lords who was ensnared by the magic of the Drow. Clegg Zincher had been charmed by the Drow and forced to do their bidding. Only the involvement of the Riddleport heroes freed him and his thugs from the machinations of the Dark Elves, allowing Clegg to save face and return to his life of crime. While not a major player in the story of the Runelords, Clegg will pop up again a bit later in our story. The Year of the Risen Rune. Just before the events which kicked off Shattered Star, the Pathfinder Society began involving themselves in another plot in Magnimar, which heavily involved the Runelords. These events began in 4711, when Sheila Hydemarch, the venture captain of the newly established Pathfinder Society Lodge in Magnimar, calls a group of PFS agents to a meeting. She informs the agents of the arrival of a new artifact on the local antiquities market, the rune-carved key, a strange device of Thassilonian origin. Hydemarch wants the agents to help the PFS acquire the key, which will be auctioned off in several weeks. The agents set themselves to the task, first by undermining a trade caravan intended to provide funds to the Aspis Consortium, a long-time rival to the PFS and a competitor in the upcoming auction. The agents then attend a pre-auction gala at the Magnimarian Cathedral of Abadar. This is functionally a reconnaissance mission, with the goal of identifying other potential buyers and determining their spending limits. With the Aspis Consortium weakened, the agents are then tasked with eliminating the other competitive bidders, though Hydemarch is careful to limit them to strictly legal means of interference. After these efforts, the agents make their way to the cathedral on the eve of the auction. As the bidding draws to a close, things look good for the PFS, but then the event is interrupted by the sudden appearance of a black-clad woman via a portal. The woman murders the auctioneer, then absconds with the key, fleeing into the streets of Magnimar. Before the agents can react, more hooded figures arrive, bursting through the cathedral's stained glass window. Dealing with these intruders, the agents quickly set out in pursuit of the thief. She leads them on a merry chase, but is eventually cornered and forced to fight. As she is defeated, the woman spits out an oath to her mouthless mistress, Lissala, the long-forgotten goddess of runes from Thassilonian history. This prayer becomes a curse, and as she dies, the assassin conjures several new portals, through which charge waves of monsters. The agents are forced to fight off several waves of enemies before Sheila Hydemarch leads a cavalry charge of reinforcements to their aid. The agents succeed in recovering the rune-carved key for Hydemarch. She thanks them for their service, but warns them to take heed. Dark forces appear to be on the rise in Varissia. The PFS will need to keep its eyes open for danger in the coming months. Several months later, Sheila Hydemarch makes a discovery and calls the agents back for another mission. She explains that all the attackers at the auction had been cultists devoted to the ancient deity Lissala, whose faith has been dead for millennia. The PFS has been unable to dig up information on their potential plans, due to the absence of the faith on Galarian for so long. However, a temple has recently been discovered on Rivendrake Island, the site of Hollow Mountain. This temple is suspected to have been devoted to Lissala during the days of Thassilon, and if the agents can investigate it, they might discover a clue to the Lissalan cultists' goals. The agents travel to Rivendrake Island, where they expect to meet with PFS field agent Reem Batel. Upon their arrival, however, they are greeted only by the local archaeologist Hala Busophis, who informs them that some mysterious force recently attacked the camp. Alarmingly, many people, including Batal, cannot be accounted for. Investigating the attack, the agents discover that the temple, which had been sealed shut, now sits open. Within, the heroes discover that something emerged from the temple's interior and attacked the camp, then returned with captives in tow. As they explore the facility, the agents learn that the temple was not dedicated to Lissala, at least not at the time of Thassilon's end. Instead, it had been dedicated to Yamasoth, the polymorph plague, a Qliphoth lord of transformations. During their exploration, the agents are set upon by several Wrath Spawn, Sin Spawn from ancient Thassilon, which are rarely encountered in the Age of Lost Omens. Defeating the Sin Spawn, the agents succeed in freeing the remaining captives, but are too late to stop the slow, painful death of Reem Batel, who was tortured to death by those same Sin Spawn. At the deepest layers of the temple, the agents confront a Ghast, draped in the robes of a priest of Yamasoth. Though they never discover this fact, the agents are facing Tholrist, a favored servant of Runelord Elaznist. In defeating Tholrist, the agents clear the temple structure of threats and return to the surface. One of the artifacts which they found within draws the attention of the archaeologist Hala. She informs them that the device is an acrimony veil, a powerful artifact which Elaznist only ever bestowed upon trusted servants. The agents return to Magnimar, glad to have stopped Tholrist, but frustrated that they are no closer to understanding the motivations of the cult of Lissala. Luckily, the agents won't need to wait long for a chance to gain more information. Far away, in Kermaga, the city of strangers, the cult of Lissala had established itself in secret within a warehouse. They disguised themselves as a leth house, a type of drug den within the city which offered the narcotic leth, which wiped short segments of the imbiber's memory and provided a sense of euphoria. While the leth business proved profitable, their true goal was apparent only to those who sought the drug out but lacked any form of payment. These poor souls could be ushered into the back by cultists and offered a deal: participate in a ceremonial feast in honor of Lissala, and get their supply of leth in return. During this ceremony, a portion of the victim's soul would be siphoned off and imprisoned into a small object called a sigil wafer, and the leth, which the victim would imbibe immediately after, would wipe any memory of the occurrence from their mind. Meanwhile, the cult secreted these sigil wafers away, smuggling them out of the city so they might fuel a dark ritual elsewhere in Varisia. Sheila Hydemarch hears about the cult's activities from a spy in Kermaga named Miss Feathers, and sends her PFS field agents out to investigate. Arriving in the city, the agents meet with Miss Feathers, then use her descriptions to locate the site of the leth house. They plunge the depths of the building, discovering a Lissalan temple beneath and a cache of strange, thin discs marked with runes of power. After defeating the head of this particular cell of cultists, a powerful cleric named Kisula, the agents also discover a note. The note names these strange disc-like objects as soul wafers, and claims that they will be used to charge something called a rune stone. The note also makes reference to a mysterious lord who must be awakened, so a new world can be ushered in. Alarmingly, the note also reveals that the cultists of Lissala are now aware of the danger the PFS poses, and will be keeping their guard up from now on. Not long after, the agents are contacted by Sheila Hydemarch via letter, and she explains to them that she's pieced together the Lissalan cultists' plans. A separate group of PFS agents recently succeeded in infiltrating a lesser branch of the cult of Lissala, and gathered notes on the broader organization. They identified the leader, the so-called Lash Mistress Vandiana, and discovered her plan to resurrect the high priest of her goddess from the times of ancient Thassilon, none other than the infamous Rune himself, the final Rune Lord of Sloth. With her knowledge of the recent attempt by Rune Lord Karzug to return to activity, Hydemarch believes that Rune's return would be nothing short of disastrous, and she declares that it is the PFS's job to oppose the Lissalans at any cost. Luckily, with this knowledge of the cultists' goals, opposing them becomes much easier. Rune is known to have been buried in a secret chamber, far beneath Galarian's surface, and reaching this chamber is only possible through the use of minor artifacts called refuge tokens, which must be paired with a special passphrase. While the code words are not yet known, rumors have recently surfaced about a newly unearthed Lissalan temple west of Kermaga, which may hold a cache of refuge tokens, if they've not already been looted. This information is fresh, however, and other interested parties might already be attempting to seize the treasure for themselves. Setting out from Kermaga, the agents head west into the mountains, until they come across the site of the Lissalan temple. Hydemarch's concerns about competitive looters prove well-founded, as the site has been freshly excavated, with signs of recent entrance. Notably, the agents see no signs of anyone leaving the temple, so whoever went in has yet to come out. Entering the temple, the agents discover a group of Shoanti, who've been charmed into helping a competing adventurer who's deeper within the structure. The agents discover numerous valuable pieces of information on Lissalan cultic practices at the time of ancient Thassilon, which is my way of saying this was an awesome source for last year's Lissala video. But the agents are forced to press on with their immediate concerns. They face and defeat an ancient Lissalan grave knight bound as a defender of the site, then confront the adventurer who entered the temple before them. This is Naroth Balam, a wizard obsessed with ancient Thassilon who is part of a small but growing faction of scholars in the region who have taken up the faith of Lissala independently of the cult working toward Rune's release. Naroth has ensnared the allegiance of a pair of sloth-spawn bodyguards, and the trio attack the agents for daring to interfere in their work. After defeating Naroth, the agents make two important discoveries. The first is the cache of refuge tokens, earned by branding oneself in front of a statue of Lissala. The second is a letter from one of Naroth's fellow modern Lissala scholars, who claims to have discovered the location of the ceremonial words which will allow the refuge tokens to transport someone to Kroon's hiding place. Armed with this knowledge, the agents return to the relative safety of Kaer Maga to plan their next action. A few months later, Sheila and her agents reconvene to make the next strike against the Lissalans. Having sorted through the notes they found among Naroth Balam's possessions, Hydemarch has discovered the location of the hidden command words which could be used to activate the refuge tokens. She informs her agents of their new destination, Desgard's 1,000 Columns. This valley, filled with ancient stone towers, is famous among Harukan ruins, as are the effects it produces on conjuration magic. The last of these towers ever constructed, the so-called 1,000th Column, was built by Kroon to house not only some of his most dangerous conjured servants, but also the command words which would grant access to his resting place. Setting out, the agents are teleported to the site by an ally of the PFS. They arrive on the edge of the site and are forced to walk the remainder of the distance, due to the interference to teleportation spells caused by the lingering, overlapping auras of conjuration which blanket the site. Making their way through the ravine, the heroes eventually reach the 1,000th Column, but are met by a copper dragon. This is Zonaladin, a very distant descendant of the tribe of dragons which razed Zin Haruka to the ground 10,000 years ago. He explains that he must determine that the agents are good before he can grant them access to the 1,000th Column, then proves his point by displaying the 24 Lissalan cultists whom he's killed in the past few days for trying to access the tower without his permission. The agents succeed in convincing him, then enter the fortress. Within, the agents discover the greatest weapon which Haruka ever had to defend against its bigger, more powerful neighbors. The halls of the tower are lined with hundreds upon hundreds of summoning runes, inscribed on massive metal sheets on the walls. Each of these corresponds to a dangerous conjured monster trapped within, which can be summoned at will by simply touching the sheet and reading the runic inscription. The Runelords of Haruka may have been lazy, but they'd prepared the most dangerous army in the world to do their dirty work, should the need ever arise. Solving the various puzzles within, the agents manage to activate a portal to the Rune Vault, a small pocket dimension within the tower. Upon entering, they are confronted by 3 sphinxes, who begin plying them with riddles and questions, eventually directing them toward the rune plates which bear the words of activation. Sensing treachery, however, the agents confront the sphinxes and see through their ruse. These 3 are in fact Immentesh Proteans, summoned by Kroon thousands of years ago to act as a final defense. The agents defeat them, then discover the location of the real plates, the originals they had been shown having been a decoy set. The agents then make their escape, dodging a few more conjured defenses on their way out. They negotiate again with Zonaladin, convincing him once and for all that they are not in fact cultists of Lissala, then return to Sheila Hydemarch with the aid of teleportation magic. With both the refuge tokens and the words of activation in hand, the PFS is ready to take action against Kroon directly, putting a stop to the cultists' efforts once and for all. Soon after, Sheila Hydemarch calls an emergency meeting of the PFS leadership in Magnamar. The agents arrive and are greeted by one of the members of the Decemvirate, the masked leaders of the Pathfinder Society. Sheila explains the situation, that the cult of Lissala is attempting to awaken Rune Lord Kroon, he having been the high priest of her faith, and that his return would threaten the whole of Varisia and beyond. While the heroes now possess a set of Runeforge tokens, and a set of activation runes to make them work, it would be foolish to assume that the Lissalans haven't also found some way to move forward, despite their setbacks. Full of a sense of urgency, the agents swiftly activate their refuge tokens, teleporting directly into Kroon's sanctum. The site is surprisingly bare bones, and the agents sense that they are deep underground. Beginning their explorations, they quickly come face to face with a creature from legend, Kurshu the Undying, Herald of Lissala. Kurshu, they will soon learn, was summoned to the site by the Lash Mistress, the leader of the Thassilonian cult in Varisia, who has found a way to access the sanctum and even now is finalizing the ceremony to awaken Kroon. The agents fight and kill Kurshu, not realizing that her essence will feed into the ritual and only hasten Kroon's return. The agents make their way deeper into the sanctum, making a critical discovery. They pass by a series of mighty runes of power, each engraved onto a metal plate suspended in the air. These are Kroon's runes of empowerment, a secret bestowed upon him by Lissala. Each one grants him a unique blessing, from increased natural armor to additional hit points and so on. Though pressed for time, the agents briefly pause and dismantle as many of these ancient runes as they can. Though it is difficult, some have already naturally degraded due to the passage of time. With several of the runes disabled, the agents move on. Arriving at the deepest level of the sanctum, the agents confront the architect of the conspiracy they've chased for the prior year, the Lash Mistress Vandania, the leader of the Thassilonian cult. The agents also discover the value of their previous interventions, as Vandania is flanked only by a pair of Dark Nagas, having been unable to secure enough refuge tokens to bring more forces into the sanctum. Vandania and the agents fight, and she is defeated, but she dies confident of her success, for her ritual is complete, and Runelord Kroon is awakening in the room beyond. Kroon soon emerges from his sarcophagus, and it doesn't take him long to piece together that the PFS agents before him are enemies, not allies. Though lazy, Kroon isn't stupid, and he watches and waits as he confronts the agents verbally, trying to ascertain as much as he can about the world he's woken up into. But Kroon is a wicked runelord of Thassilon, and soon the fight begins. Kroon wields not only his legendary dragon-tooth spear, but his rune-carved rod as well, making him a dangerous foe. But, even as the fight begins, he feels something is wrong. His powers, once so great, are diminished, as though Lissala's blessings have faded. Only too late does he realize that some of his runes of empowerment have been destroyed. The agents, for their part, fight with grit and tenacity, and soon it's Kroon who is on the back foot and fighting for his life. Finally, after a titanic clash, the agents prevail, and Kroon, the last runelord of Sloth, is killed. Varisia is saved, and the agents reactivate their refuge tokens and return to Magnamar with Kroon's powerful magical artifacts in hand. Though these agents would no longer involve themselves in the events of the Runelord's story, Sheila Hydemarch took the lessons of the past year to heart. The threat of the Runelords was well and truly on the rise again, and Varisia needed heroes available to face it. Quietly, she began making inquiries into ancient Thassilonian weapons which might be turned against the Runelords. One in particular caught her interest: the Sihedron. Lord of Runes. Please note, my campaign and adventure summaries I've chosen to write in present tense, as they are events which players can experience directly. This next section is covering the events of the novel Lord of Runes by Dave Gross, so I've chosen to write it in the past tense to differentiate the means by which players or readers experience the events. In the year 4715 AR, meaning a few years after Shattered Star, the famous former Pathfinder venture captain, Count Varian Jaeger of Cheliax, and his Nephilim bodyguard, Radovan, were returning to southern Avestan from their involvement in the Worldwound Crusade. The pair stopped in Korvosa, where the Ayuvaran Count Jaeger was informed by the masters of Korvosa's famous arcane academy that one of his childhood friends had recently died and left his possessions to Jaeger. Reviewing these possessions, the Count and his new acquaintance, Illyria Ornelos, discovered a strange collection of bound sheets of blank parchment, stored in a box marked with the Sihedron rune. At the same time, Radovan was enjoying himself in Old Korvosa, but was soon robbed by a Varisian thief named Zora. Pairing up with a local bounty hunter, Radovan pursued the thief, but lost her in Korvosa's Shingles neighborhood. Count Jaeger and Illyria soon discovered the secret of the blank pages the Count had inherited. Upon being soaked in blood, the pages revealed words written in a flowing script. The text was Thassilonian in origin, and the two researchers deduced that the text must be part of Xutha's infamous gluttonous tome, and specifically the Cardozian Codex. They also deduced that Professor Igreshta's workshop had been robbed prior to their arrival, and that the professor might not have been dead at all, or at least not permanently dead. Surmising that the thief who had robbed Radovan might be the same thief who robbed the professor, the party of adventurers followed the thief to Kermaga. During this journey, it became apparent that Varian Jaeger had been cursed by his possession of the Cardozian Codex. He was afflicted with a voracious appetite, and became obsessed with the study of necromancy, an area of magic which he had previously sworn off. Arriving in Kermaga, Count Jaeger gained access to the Thoracic Spire, an ancient and remarkably well-maintained library in the city which held all manner of secrets, both ancient and arcane. It was in this library that the Count met an old friend, the former pathfinder Iando Klein, who was himself in possession of one of the three pieces of Xutha's gluttonous tome. In Klein's case, it was the Bone Grimoire, and he had been similarly cursed, not with an unending appetite, but with a form of unlife, which in mechanical terms probably equates to negative healing. Klein revealed what he had learned of the volumes of the gluttonous tome fragments. According to his sources, a taiga giant warlord had recently risen to power in Belkzen, and claimed to have gathered all three sections of the gluttonous tome. The taiga giant turned himself into a lich, and claimed to be Runelord Xutha reborn. This claim appears to have been false, however, since a group of adventurers managed to steal two of these tomes and brought them to Kermaga for sale. These adventurers soon found themselves murdered or robbed, and thus the two necromantic tomes were let loose into the world. As Jaeger and Klein attempted to compare their ancient texts, something unexpected happened. The two books lurched toward one another and violently recombined. After a moment's hesitation, Jaeger became infused with a compulsion to own the book, and seized it for himself, taking on both curses simultaneously. As all this was happening, Radovan and his companions joined forces with a group of former Grey Maidens, who had formed a mercenary company under the command of a woman called Faceless Cade. These forces worked together to capture the thief Zora, and discovered that she had been compelled by an enchantment to keep silent about who had hired her to burgle Professor Igreshta's library. Klein and Jaeger then reunited with the rest of their allies. In desperation to heal his companion's curse, Klein led the group to a Shoanti shaman in Kermaga. This shaman succeeded in removing the Geas from Zora, but also confirmed that the third section of the gluttonous tome, the Black Book, never left its resting place in Zingastash. This site could be found beneath the Sleeper, an ancient mountain with the depiction of an immense dragon carved into its face. The shaman also informed them that both Count Jaeger and Illyria were descended from Xutha himself, a secret he gleaned from the spirits of his ancestors. Unfortunately, the shaman was unable to break the curses afflicting Count Jaeger, and the process of breaking Zora's Geas left him exhausted and on the brink of death. After he passed, his caretaker, a woman named Kazia, joined the Count and his allies, and they set out for the Sleeper in Belkzen. Before the journey could begin, however, Count Jaeger and Radovan questioned Zora. The young Varisian thief confirmed what the group had come to suspect. Professor Igreshta was still active on Varisia. After having come into the possession of the Cardozian Codex, he had been cursed with that same endless hunger which had afflicted Varian. To break the curse, the professor realized he needed to die, but could be brought back as an undead creature and be free from the curse's power. He had acquired the book in the first place by hiring Zora and a companion to steal the text from its previous owner, using a trio of shadows to contact her. After his passing, Professor Igreshta bound Zora with a geas, and forbade her from discussing his plans at all. His hope was to draw Jaeger to Korvosa, and pass the cursed tome along to him, so Jaeger might locate the remaining portions of the text and piece them together. From there, the professor hoped to recover the completed tome, and restore Xutha to power. Count Jaeger and his companions set out for Belkzen. After a long journey through the Cinderlands on the Storval Plateau, the group arrived at the Sleeper. They climbed to the apex of the mountain, where they entered the maw of the dragon, which had been carved into the mountain's face. Within the maw, they encountered a series of caves, which led deep underground. The group delved deep into the bowels of the mountain until they came across something unexpected: the hoard of a brass dragon. Before anyone in the group could react, something burst forth from the hoard of treasure, an ancient tome covered in black lacquered leather. This was the third piece of the gluttonous tome, the Black Book, and it flew toward Varian Jaeger and combined violently with the other two sections of the book. Thus, the gluttonous tome, spellbook, and soul cage of Runelord Zutha was reformed and restored to its full might. At this point, the party was confronted by the brass dragon who nested beneath the sleeper, who introduced herself as Svanostel, and declared that she was the protector of the Black Book. Count Jaeger, who'd become partially possessed by the malevolence of the gluttonous tome, confronted Svanostel and reached out with his newly awakened magic. He pulled from her treasure hoard a collection of magic rings and aeon stones. These were the regalia and chosen weapons of Runelord Zutha, which Svanostel had collected from the ruins of Zingastash over the centuries. Equipped with the weapons of Zutha, Count Jaeger demanded that the dragon allow him to access her library, ostensibly so he could destroy the gluttonous tome. In truth, the Count was already well beyond saving. The final trap of the gluttonous tome had been sprung. With the tome fully assembled, Jaeger was now fully ensnared by its magic, and he was compelled to put these powers to use. He began to descend into paranoid delusions as the tome infected his mind, and prepared his body to become the new vessel for Runelord Zutha. Despite her understanding of what was happening to Count Jaeger, Svanostel agreed to allow him and his companions into her vast library, in the hopes that his companions might be able to hold him to his promise of destroying the gluttonous tome. Additionally, Svanostel was confident in her ability to kill Jaeger if the need arose. Unfortunately, after days of research, it became clear that there was no practical means of destroying the gluttonous tome. Additionally, Count Jaeger's possession by the book grew more severe by the hour. This all culminated in a knockdown, drag-out fight between the Count and his companions, who sought to kill him to free him from the book's curse. Their intention was to immediately revive him using a scroll, but Jaeger was well beyond reason by this point. The Count succeeded in defending himself and defeating his companions, but was finally brought down by his own bodyguard, Radovan. Immediately after Jaeger fell, disaster struck. Professor Igreshta, who had been waiting and watching in the shadows, attacked with his shadowy servants, and succeeded in seizing the gluttonous tome. He fled from the sleeper with his servants, and traveled north to the Cenotaph, the site of Zutha's tomb on the border of modern Ustalav. Only then were Illyria, Radovan, and the rest able to revive Count Jaeger. Jaeger brooded over his own failure to resist the magics of the gluttonous tome, while he and his companions recovered from the fight. In a fit of rage, he struck out at a nearby statue of Lasala, goddess of runes, with his blade, an artifact called the Shadowless Sword. Through some divine act, either from Desna, Lasala, or perhaps both, the sword became infused with ancient rune magic, becoming marked with the runes for fear and hope. Svanostel witnessed the blessing, and she and the Count decided that they alone were powerful enough to face Igreshta and defeat him before he could restore Zutha to unlife. Equipped with the rings and crown of Zutha, and with the empowered Shadowless Sword, Count Jaeger set out on Svanostel's back, leaving his companions behind to escape Belkzen. Of course, these companions weren't about to let Jaeger go die alone, so they set out at speed to the north, desperate to reach the Cenotaph in time to aid their friend. Arriving at the Cenotaph, Jaeger and Svanostel discovered that Igreshta had already entered. They followed after him, convincing the legions of undead guardians that Count Jaeger, as a descendant of Zutha, equipped with the Runelord's own regalia, was in fact Zutha's heir, and the only one who would restore the Runelord to power. They descended into the depths of the Cenotaph, passing through a series of prison cells which contained hundreds upon hundreds of undead ghouls, which had been sealed in these cages for 10,000 years, and were driven mad by their hunger as a result. Arriving at Zutha's burial chamber, Jaeger and Svanostel confronted Igreshta and attempted to destroy him and the gluttonous tome. They were too slow, however, and Igreshta managed to complete the ritual to resurrect Zutha. Zutha's soul tied itself to Igreshta's body, which rapidly began to transform into Zutha's lich form. Jageir and Svanostel attempted to strike at the Runelord before he could fully form, but Zutha had built his crypt at the site of a powerful unholy sanctification, which provided him and all the undead creatures within with a level of fast healing, which neither hero could overcome. Confident in his return, Zutha thanked Jageir for his part in the Runelord's restoration, then easily reclaimed all of his regalia. The ancient stones and rings which the Count had been relying upon to amplify his own powers were torn away, and returned eagerly to their rightful master. At this moment, when all hope seemed lost, the Count's companions arrived. Illyria, Kazia, and Eando Klein peppered the Runelord with magic, while Radovan and even the Count's loyal hound Arnazant set to work destroying the last of Igreshta's minions. Jageir and Svanostel redoubled their efforts, but no amount of damage they could do to Zutha could overcome his passive regeneration. On top of that, so long as Zutha remained in contact with his gluttonous tome, even the shadowless sword was unable to damage it. As the fight raged on, the foundations of the cenotaph began to crumble, dropping the ravenous ghouls from the prison above into the battle. These ghouls, consumed by their starvation-induced madness, attacked the nearest being, which turned out to be Zutha. As the ghouls attempted to consume him, Zutha threw off and attempted to control them. His control was no match for their hunger, however, and he was forced to destroy them. This inspired Count Jageir, who took to the air with his companions, then worked with Kazia to collapse the rest of the prison. This unleashed hundreds, perhaps thousands, of starving ghouls upon Zutha, and they leapt upon him with ravenous fury, and began consuming his flesh. While Zutha could heal as fast as his wounds were created, the same regeneration applied to the ghouls themselves. Zutha needed to destroy each ghoul completely, which took time and attention, forcing him to forego his grip on the gluttonous tome. Separated from its master, the tome was vulnerable, and Count Jageir took his opportunity to strike. He attacked the book with the shadowless sword, separating it once again into its three component parts, the Cardozian Codex, the Bone Grimoire, and the Black Book. The Count and his companions seized the volumes, then made their escape, sealing the cenotaph behind them, and leaving Zutha to be endlessly devoured for eternity. The companions traveled to Vigil, where Svanostel handed the Bone Grimoire to her brother, Zostromo, a brass dragon sworn to work with the Knights of Lastwall. Zostromo agreed to hide the book at a location only he would know. At the same time, Svanostel took the Black Book to her hoard under the Sleeper, where she would resume her duties as the book's guardian. The Cardozian Codex was left to Count Jageir, who agreed to never open it, and thus avoid the book's inherent curse. He brought the book with him as he returned to Cheliax, where he presumably hid it in a location known only to him. And that is what happened in Curse of the Crimson Throne, Second Darkness, The Year of the Risen Rune, and Lord of Runes. Yikes, that was a lot of ground to cover in one video, but I really feel that it's all necessary for a comprehensive view of the landscape of Varisia and Thassilon in the Age of Lost Omens. I really hope you enjoyed this one, since it's definitely the odd one out in the Merry Little Sinmas lineup. If anything in this video sounds fun to you, I encourage you to check out the source material directly. Lord of Runes is a really fun novel. I hadn't even read any of the other previous Varian Jageir novels when I picked it up, and I still had a great time. The Year of the Risen Rune is pretty solid as far as PFS scenarios go, though I would probably take that with a grain of salt since I personally don't really play Pathfinder Society. Of the two APs I discussed, I thoroughly recommend Curse of the Crimson Throne, and especially the hardcover Anniversary Collection. This was the first AP I ever ran, and it's great from start to finish. Second Darkness is a little harder to recommend since I've only ever read it, and it's basically non-canon now since the OGL crisis removed the drow. Still, it has its charms, and a good GM can make up for any of the campaign's shortcomings. Stick around on this channel for next week's video, when I get back to the Runelord trilogy with a deep dive into the events of Shattered Star, a road trip through Varisia which has the heroes exploring some of the darkest and most dangerous dungeons in the entire region, in a desperate treasure hunt which echoes the tales of Indiana Jones. Thanks for watching, and I wish you all a merry little Sinmas.